April 30th, 1945. Deep beneath the shattered streets of Berlin, in a concrete tomb reeking of cordite and fear, Adolf Hitler is dead. The 1,000-year Reich lasts just 12. To the world, the grotesque saga is over. The radio crackles with anticipation. The war in Europe surely will end in hours. But it doesn't. The fighting explodes with a renewed, desperate ferocity for another 8 days. A brutal, senseless week that claims over 120,000 more lives. Soldiers, civilians, children. Why? Because of a secret. A final, catastrophic mistake, hidden not in a weapon or a battle plan, but in the inked paragraphs of a dead man's last will. This is not the story of how the Nazi regime fell. This is the story of how, in its death throes, it was tricked into destroying itself from within. This is Hitler's final mistake, the secret operation that turned collapse into carnage. To understand this final act, we must first meet the prisoner, not Hitler in his bunker, but the man he chose to lead. Grand Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of the U-boat Wolfpacks, was 300 kilometers away in the coastal town of Plön. He was a warrior, not a politician, a man who believed in the chain of command, in order, in the solemn duty of a soldier. On the afternoon of May 1st, a signal officer handed him a fateful telegram. It was from the Reich Chancellery in Berlin. It began, "Führer deceased yesterday at 15:30 hours. Donitz's face, usually an impassive mask of Prussian discipline, reportedly paled. He had been named Hitler's successor as president of the Reich. But the message was poisoned, it was vague. It spoke of a political testament. It urged him to show exemplary hardness in continuing the fight. It was signed not by Hitler, but by Joseph Goebbels, and most crucially by Martin Bormann. The spider was already spinning his web. Let's freeze this moment. Look at the strategic map. Sound of a map unfurling in the west. American and British forces have overrun Germany, halting at the Elbe River under agreement with the Soviets. In the south, patches of resistance crumble. But the east is a gaping wound. 3 massive Soviet fronts, over 2.5 million men, are driving westward like a tsunami. Their objective, not just Berlin, but the entire Baltic coast. Trapped between this Soviet hammer and the Western Allied anvil are nearly 3 million German soldiers of Army Group Vistula and Army Group Center. And behind them, a terrified flood of 8 million civilian refugees, all desperate to reach the west before the Red Army closes the gates. Donitz's task is a monstrous duality, to surrender to the Americans and British as quickly as possible, while somehow holding back the Soviets long enough for his people to escape. It is a race against time, fueled by horror. And into this delicate, explosive equation, Bormann introduces chaos. Who was Martin Bormann? He was not a charismatic leader. He was a clerk, Hitler's personal secretary, the gatekeeper, the man who controlled access, paperwork, and finances. In the bunker's final days, as the giants of the Reich, Göring, Himmler, Speer fled or conspired, Bormann remained. He became the regime's central nervous system, and he saw 2 truths. 1, the war was irrevocably lost. 2, his only currency for survival was the authority of the now-dead Führer. So, he launched his operation. Its goal was not victory, but continuity, of his power, of the Nazi cause, or at least the myth of it. He would become a ghost in the machine, using the machinery of command to create a phantom reality where the Reich could still be saved, where orders still flowed from a functioning headquarters. This grand deception had a name whispered in the signals traffic, Regenbogen, rainbow, a promise of hope after the storm. It was a lie. The operation began even before Hitler's suicide. Bormann and the last chief of the Army High Command, Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, a man whose blind loyalty made him a perfect pawn, began issuing a stream of orders. These were not tactical directives for a real defense. They were incantations. They spoke of Alpenfestung, the Alpine fortress, a vast, impregnable redoubt in the mountains of Austria and Bavaria, where the SS would fight for years. This fortress existed primarily on propaganda maps and in Allied intelligence reports. It was a hollow myth. But by reinforcing the myth, Bormann gave the Western Allies a reason to push hard, and gave fragmented German units a false place to rally. More insidiously, direct orders were sent to armies already cut off and crumbling. Hold at all costs. Breakthrough to Berlin is imminent. The Wenck army is approaching. General Walter Wenck's 12th Army was real, but it was a battered force trying to rescue civilians, not relieve Berlin. In Bormann's signals, it was transformed into a messianic relief force, always just about to turn the tide. Picture the confusion at Donitz's headquarters. He is receiving genuine, desperate pleas from front commanders. We are out of ammunition. Soviet tanks in our rear. Refugee columns blocking roads. Intermixed with these are the official signals from the Supreme Command of the Armed Forces OKW, still ostensibly under Keitel's and Bormann's influence, filled with fantastical directives. Which chain of command is real? As the new head of state, Donitz feels bound by duty to the old structure, even as he tries to build a new one for surrender. The secret Operation Regenbogen has created a schizophrenic command. One arm, under Donitz's trusted Admiral von Friedeberg, is in the field trying to negotiate surrender. The other arm, the ghost limb controlled by Bormann's echoes, is still ordering men to die. The result is catastrophic hesitation, precious hours, then days, are lost deciphering reality from fiction. Now, we descend deeper into the bunker, to the core of the deceit, Hitler's last will and testament. This document, dictated in the early hours of April 29th, is the genesis of the disaster. By expelling Hermann Göring and Heinrich Himmler, Hitler purged the perceived traitors. By appointing Donitz, he chose a soldier he believed would fight with fanatical persistence. But by confirming Martin Bormann as party minister and executor of the will, Hitler gave the clerk ultimate power over the narrative of his death and the transition of power. Bormann now controlled all physical documents and, crucially, the timing and content of the communications leaving the bunker. He sat on the news of Hitler's death for over 18 hours. Why? He needed to secure his own exit plan. In those hours, he finalized the dispersal of Nazi party funds, arranged false papers, and solidified the web of contradictory orders that would create the fog of war he needed to vanish into. Above the bunker, the world was hell. The Battle of Berlin was ending, but the battle for Germany was not. In the forests southeast of the city, over 200,000 German soldiers and civilians were trapped in what became known as the Halbe Pocket. Soviet tanks and aircraft mercilessly pounded the area. Escape routes were mere paths through the woods, choked with panic. These people were fighting for their lives, but they were also, unknowingly, fighting for the time Bormann needed. Their sacrifice was the backdrop to his betrayal. Similarly, in Prague, a massive uprising broke out on May 5th. German troops under Field Marshal Ferdinand Schorner, a fanatical loyalist kept in the dark by Bormann's fantasy of continued resistance, brutally suppressed the city, leading to a final bloody battle when the Soviets arrived days later. Each of these tragedies was intensified by the lack of a clear, authoritative command to lay down arms. Finally, on the night of May 1st-2nd, Bormann makes his move. With Goebbels dead by his own hand, the bunker is a tomb. Bormann, wearing the uniform of an SS general, leads a breakout group into the apocalyptic Berlin night. He carries with him copies of Hitler's testament. His goal, to reach Donitz, to legitimize himself as the bearer of the Führer's final wisdom, and to assume his rightful place as the power behind the throne. He never arrives. His fate is swallowed by the chaos he helped engineer, killed by a shell, shot at a bridge, or perhaps, as some conspiracy theories insist, escaped. But his legacy of confusion survived him. For the next 48 hours, as Donitz tried to establish his government in the town of Flensburg near the Danish border, signals still arrived, stamped with the authority of a command structure that had ceased to exist. The ghost was still giving orders. Let's pause for the most haunting question: what if? What if, on April 30th at 4 p.m., a clear, unequivocal signal had gone out to all German forces from Donitz? The Führer is dead. Bid for a few more hours of borrowed time. The 120,000 who died in those extra days did not fall for the fatherland. They fell for a file clerk's escape plan. They were the final, unwilling participants in an operation that destroyed the last shred of honor from the Nazi cause, and in doing so, completed the total moral and physical destruction of the Reich. Hitler's mistake was creating a system where such a betrayal was not just possible, but inevitable. A system where, in the end, the only thing left to command was the darkness.